Welcome back, class. We are going to be looking at the next type of tissue, which is called connective tissue. So in the previous video, we've covered epithelial tissue. Now we're going to look at connective tissue, and in upcoming videos, we'll talk about neural tissue and muscle tissue. Remember, there's four types of tissue: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. Now, if we think back to what we learned about epithelial tissue, we said epithelial tissue was a bunch of cells closely packed together with very little extracellular matrix. That's epithelial tissue. Connective tissue, in contrast, is where we have widely spaced cells separated by protein fibers and ground substance called matrix or extracellular matrix. Same thing. Now, connective tissue is the most abundant. It's the most abundant and variable type of tissue that's found in all parts of the body. And it's got some important functions. Okay. One is that it connects organs to each other. And that's kind of neat, right? Connective tissue. So it can connect organs to each other. It even connects the epithelium to the rest of the body. It gives support, it gives protection. And when we talk about protection, not just physical protection, but immune protection. Well, that's because when we talk about blood, blood is connective tissue, it's just liquid connective tissue. Blood comes in two flavors: red blood cells and white blood cells. The red blood cells bring oxygen, they help oxygenate your tissues, but white blood cells are part of the immune system. And white blood cells, especially your B cells make antibodies. And those antibodies are part of your immune system. Those antibodies are referred to as IgMs or IgE or IgA. The Ig just stands for immunoglobulin. Okay, when you see the IgMs, like if you do a food allergy test, or let's say you think you have Epstein-Barr and you flag for IgM, it means you have a current infection right now. Okay, but if the IgMs are not there and you see some IgGs, it's a past infection. Antibodies are going to linger around for years and years and years. Okay. And you want them to. It kind of protects you. It's kind of like a memory. So in case you ever come around that insult, your body can take care of it. Okay, and blood is designed for transport, to transport materials, to transport oxygen, to transport CO2, to transport nutrients, to transport hormones. So we need blood. Blood is liquid connective tissue. So the characteristics of connective tissue, it's highly vascular. What do we mean by vascular? It means it has a really good blood supply. Whereas epithelium, not so much a good blood supply. Not as good as connective tissue. Okay. So connective tissue has a really, really good blood supply. There's a few exceptions. Cartilage, tendons, and ligaments, they have a poor blood supply. Cartilage, tendons, and ligaments have a really bad blood supply. If you have degeneration of the cartilage in your knee, it takes a while to heal because it takes a while to bring the nutrients there if it doesn't have blood supply. When you damage a muscle, muscles attach to bones by way of tendons, right? So let's say this is a bone, that's your arm, and let's say this is your forearm, and then these are your fingers. Here's a muscle, your biceps muscle. But the muscle attaches, these are B for bone. The biceps are going from one bone to another bone, but it doesn't attach by muscle, it attaches by an extension called a tendon. The tendon is how the muscle attaches to the bone. But when you go from bone to bone, like this, that's a ligament. So ligaments go bone to bone, tendons attach a muscle. That's a muscle. So tendons attach muscle to bone, ligaments go bone to bone. Okay. Now, Ligaments have a really bad blood supply. Cartilage has a pretty bad blood supply. Tendon's a little bit better. Tendon's better because if you ever damaged a muscle or a tendon, it heals. Maybe it takes a week or 2 weeks to heal. But if you sprain the ligament, you sprain your ankle, it could take a few weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks for that to really heal and get better. And that's because of the blood supply. Which brings up a good point to differentiate a strain from a sprain. They're not the same thing. You sprain ligaments, you strain muscles and tendons. So just think of the T in strain with the T with tendons. Tendons are just an extension of muscle. So muscles and tendons can be strained, but ligaments are sprained. All right, so when we look at connective tissue, we are going to have three main categories, A, B, and C. There's connective tissue proper, there's supporting connective tissue, and then there's fluid connective tissue. Fluid connective tissue is pretty easy. It's just blood, right? With blood, we have red blood cells and we have white blood cells. When we talk about supporting connective tissue, supporting, we think of the skeleton that supports the body. So it's bones and cartilage. And when we talk about bones, we're going to focus on compact bone. There's spongy bone and compact bone, but we're going to focus a little bit more on compact bone. When we look at cartilage, cartilage comes in three flavors: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Hyaline, elastic, and fibro. Those are the three types of cartilage. Okay, so again, we talk about fluid connective tissue, we talk about bones, we talk about supporting, we think of the bones and cartilage, think of that skeleton. And then we talk about bone, we're going to focus on compact bone. And when we talk about cartilage, we'll refer to these three: hyaline, elastic, and fibro. Okay. The one over here under connective tissue proper, there's two categories here, and it's loose and dense. When we talk about dense, we'll focus on regular dense connective tissue and irregular. And then under loose, we'll talk about areolar, adipose, and reticular, right? This is why I told you in a previous video, epithelium and connective tissue is a little bit more challenging than learning muscle and nerve because they have more subcategories. Epithelium is pretty easy because, right, we got to ask ourselves, is it one or two layers, right? And then what's the shape of the cells? That's how we name it. Here we've got all these little subcategories. And I believe this showed up on one of the Connect quizzes where you had to kind of drag and drop, right? So you got to drag and drop the three main categories and then the subcategories and what falls under it. Okay, so we're going to start with, let's start with this column first, okay? Connective tissue proper. So we're going to refer to this. So we're going to do loose first, and then we'll go to dense. So under loose connective tissue proper, there's three flavors there. There's areolar, adipose, and reticular. Now, areolar is the layer that's going to separate your skin from the deeper tissues. So, like if you pinch your forearm and you pinch it, you can pull away and separate your skin from the muscle that's lying deep to it, right? When a massage therapist is working on you and doing soft tissue manipulation, it's that areolar that creates that separation between what's above and what's below. It's the padding. And it's made up of elastic fibers and collagen fibers. These are protein fibers. Elastin and collagen are protein. Elastin, I think of elastic, think of a rubber band. Collagen is for strength. Collagen is strength. So think of your skin has lots of collagen. If someone is a heavy, heavy smoker for years, what happens to the skin? Kind of gets wrinkly. That's because the oxidation from the smoke broke down the collagen, giving the person wrinkles. They don't have good tone in the facial skin anymore because of the collagen. Collagen is found in your skin, your hair, your nails. It even makes up 1/3 of your bone is collagen. 1/3 of your bone is collagen. Okay. Uh, Adipose, these are fat cells. Now, here's something that's kind of interesting. We'll do this, and then I'm going to do this. These two cells look like a similar shape, and often under a microscope, a fat cell or an adipocyte looks like a squamous cell. They're flat and irregular. The difference is a squamous cell, the nucleus is in the center, but in a fat cell, the nucleus is at the periphery. And the reason for this is that adipose or fat cells, they store toxins for us. They store toxins. So if the nucleus is in the middle, you'll kill the cell. So it hides the nucleus in the periphery. So when you're eating foods that have pesticides and fungicides and herbicides, those toxins enter the fat cell. And the more toxins you have, you get hypertrophy of the fat cell, meaning it gets bigger. It gets bigger and bigger the more toxins there are. Okay. So when we look at someone that may be thicker or that may be obese or morbidly obese, it's an effect of their body trying to protect themselves, right? It's that there's lots of toxins in their environment and it's storing it in these adipose cells. And little by little, when given a chance, these fat cells can rupture and the toxins can move to the liver for detoxification. So you have to be careful when you do detoxes. If you have too much die off of fat cells too quickly, your liver may not be able to handle the load. Okay. The amount of fat cells that you have increase until about puberty. And that's why it's important to try and maintain healthy body composition to the time of puberty. So if you're a thicker child, you're going to be a thicker adult. If you're thinner and you have healthier body composition at the time of puberty, it's usually easier for that individual to manage their weight and their body composition for the rest of their life. If they're thicker at the time of puberty, you just simply have more fat cells to manage for the rest of your life. Okay. Think of spiders and insects. They don't have fat cells. So when farmers spray their crops with herbicides and fungicides and those insects eat the crop, they die instantly. They don't have fat cells, so it goes right to the nervous system of the insect and they die. Humans, we have fat cells. So when we eat herbicides and fungicides and pesticides, we don't die right away. Maybe over an extended period of time, but not immediately. It's a slow death. Okay? Years and years and years of accumulation of toxins. Okay, the reticular is also loose connective tissue, right? Loose connective tissue proper. It helps to provide the framework for support within our organs. Okay. Now let's look at dense connective tissue proper. Okay, so if we go here, we've already done this one. Now let's look at this one. Dense connective tissue, regular and irregular. So dense regular is where you have densely packed collagen fibers. So if this is a collagen fiber, they run really tight and parallel to each other. So that is dense regular. So when you have fibers running in the same direction, when I do dissections for my students and I show them in a lab, look at the fibers of these muscles, look at the fibers of the tendons. They're moving in the same direction. These are tendons and ligaments. They need to be moving in the same direction. But sometimes we have parts of the body that have collagen that don't run in the same direction. They run in these irregular patterns. Think of getting a massage. Your massage therapist just doesn't move up and down, left and right. They can manipulate the skin in a variety of positions without tearing your skin. Of course, assuming there's no soft tissue autoimmune diseases. You can rub your eyeball with your knuckles and squeeze, with your knuckles, rubbing your eyeballs up, down, left, right, diagonal, and your eyeball just bounces back to its original shape. That's because of dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, so we find it in the skin, we find it around the capsule, around internal organs, we'll find it in the eyeball, dense, irregular. Understand the concept there. Elastic connective tissue, these are found in certain ligaments. Where do we need more flexibility and elasticity? Well, the vertebral column has 24 freely movable vertebrae. We have 7 in the cervical spine, we have 12 in the thoracic spine, and we have 5 in the lumbar, right? We have 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar. When you add them up, you get 24. How do you remember that? You eat at 7 a.m., 12 noon, and 5 p.m. 7 a.m., 12 noon, and 5 p.m. 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 24 freely movable vertebrae. What are ligaments? Ligaments go from bone to bone. Because the vertebral column and each vertebra are very stable, because they're stable the way they're designed bony wise, the body's going to have ligaments that go from each bone. But think of how your spine moves. You can flex, you can rotate, you can extend. We need elasticity of those. But if we think of the knee joint is a large, large joint of the body, and it's also very unstable. So the ligaments of the knee need more collagen. Collagen, we think, is associated with strength and stability. Elastic, think of elasticity for flexibility. All right, so we've knocked this one off. We're done. Let's look at fluid, and then we'll finish with supporting. So with fluid connective tissue, we think of blood. Blood has red blood cells, we have white blood cells, and we have platelets. All right. Red blood cells are known as erythrocytes. Erythro means red, leuco means white. So red blood cells, they carry the blood gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide and even nitric oxide. Your white blood cells fight infection, and your platelets, they're involved in forming a clot, which help us stop bleeding. Platelets create clots. So if a person wants to prevent themselves from clotting, maybe they take aspirin. Aspirin blocks platelets. So if a platelet helps you clot and you take an aspirin to block the platelet, you can't form a clot. So when people get cuts and they bleed, it takes a while for them to form a scab. Okay. A lot of other things besides aspirin can keep the blood nice and thin. I for myself, I use omega 3s, omega 3 fatty acids. I myself use about 4,000 milligrams a day of it. Garlic can do the same thing. Niacin can do the same thing. I use something called NATO Cerezymes. Again, all natural, and helps to prevent thrombosis or clotting. Okay. All right. So that's blood. Lymph is also fluid connective tissue. Lymph is the stuff that we find between the cells. Okay. It's interstitial fluid, and that's found between the cells of the human body. They're going to enter lymph nodes or lymph vessels. Okay. It's another type of liquid. All right, let's look at the supporting connective tissue. So we have cartilage. Again, cartilage is avascular, meaning poor blood supply. Cartilage cells are known as chondrocytes. Chondro means cartilage, chondrocytes. And the 3 main types are hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is the strongest. I think of the intervertebral discs, right? Someone has a bulging disc or herniated disc between their vertebrae. Fibrocartilage is the strongest. I also think of the pubic symphysis for that. The pubic symphysis, it looks like intervertebral discs. Intervertebral discs go this way. The pubic symphysis goes this way. It's between the pubic bone. And I also think of the meniscus, which is between the knee, right? When people have a torn meniscus, a damaged medial meniscus, or a damaged lateral meniscus, those are fibrocartilage. Elastic cartilage, this allows for flexibility. Uh, we need flexibility in the lungs, the ears, the nose, um, the epiglottis, which is in the back of the throat. That's elastic. It's the epiglottis, that's the flap that kind of closes off the windpipe. So when you eat and food goes down, this cartilage, this type of cartilage blocks the windpipe, diverting food down your esophagus so it doesn't go down the windpipe. When people drink and then they laugh at the same time and it goes down the wrong pipe, it's snuck through the epiglottis, right? That's really, really uncomfortable. Hyaline cartilage, this is the most common type of cartilage, and this is the one that's kind of associated with degenerative joint disease or arthritis. It's what we call osteoarthritis. Okay. This is what we find between the two bones that make up a joint. So between the shoulder joint, between the hip joint, between the fingers, we have hyaline cartilage. Okay. And this is primarily made up of type 1 collagen fibers. And this one, hyaline, is type 2 collagen fibers. You know how some people supplement with collagen? So type 1 collagen helps to rebuild fibrocartilage, and type 2 helps to build the cartilage between the joints that's very helpful with osteoarthritis and degenerative joint disease. So here we go. It's a drag and drop. So we have to choose between elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage, and hyaline cartilage. So which type of cartilage is composed of a network of branching elastic fibers? I thought they taught us not to use the word in the definition. So anyway, that's pretty easy. All right, so now we have fibrocartilage and hyaline cartilage. Remember, fibro is the strongest. So I think the intervertebral discs for this. And hyaline cartilage, I'm thinking my other joints. So fibrocartilage is composed mainly of type 1 collagen fibers and thick, right? Type 1 collagen that forms thick parallel bundles. So remember, that's collagen. So if we have a lot of this that's running parallel, it's nice and thick. Well, of course, that's fibrocartilage. That's why it's so strong. But if we have collagen like this, and that's it, not too thick, it's type 2, but it doesn't form thick bundles, so this can break down more easily. That's with degenerative joint disease or osteoarthritis, and it's the same cartilage that breaks down with rheumatoid arthritis as well. Okay, this has shown up in the past on a Connect quiz. Now, by process of elimination, let's just look at this for a second. We see a bunch of cells. We don't know what kind they are yet, but we're looking at the stuff between the cells, which is extracellular matrix. So when we look at these choices, the only thing we have here is the matrix of hyaline cartilage, right? The blue stuff is the extracellular matrix. So this is the matrix of hyaline cartilage. These little crystals that we see here, those cells that look like raindrops, that's what hyaline cartilage looks like under a microscope. Now, bone, we're going to talk about bone here. And I'm going to, do I want to create another video for bone? I want to include this all in one because connective tissue is connective tissue. So when we look at bone, there's two main types of cells. When I think of bone, I think of a type of cell that builds up bone to make it stronger. and I think of another bone cell that breaks down bone. So these two cells work in opposite ways, but they work together. Like everything else in the body, things build up and break down. They build up and break down. We make skin, then we break it down. We make hair, and then we break it down. We make red blood cells, and then we break it down. We make bone, and then we break it down. So the osteoblast is a type of cell that forms bone, and the osteoclast is the type of cell that dissolves bone. So bone builds up and then it breaks down. It builds up and breaks down. That's normal physiology. But what happens if the osteoclast is working overtime and it just breaks down bone, breaks down bone, breaks down bone, and you're breaking down faster than you can build up? If you're breaking down faster than you build up, don't we call that osteoporosis? All right, so we want what's called healthy bone remodeling. Just like remodeling a bathroom, remodeling a kitchen. What happens when you remodel a home? When you have a home that needs to be remodeled, you bring in a crew, a demolition crew, and they break down the sheetrock, they break down the walls, they break it down, and then you bring in a construction crew that builds up the osteoblast. So you build down and break up. You build up, break down, build up, break down, and in the same ratio, in harmony, that's healthy remodeling. They call it, there's a term for that called coupling. Coupling. They make a good couple, don't they? They're working really nice together, a good couple. So when they're coupled, it's balanced. When they're not coupled, then that means they're not building up and breaking down at the same. That's what osteoporosis is. Okay? So those are the two main types. Now, when you have this one cell that's an osteoblast, if this cell right here is an osteoblast, it's going to produce matrix. It's going to produce calcium salts. It's going to produce a cement. So whatever it's producing, right, it's going to push it out here, and eventually, whatever this osteoblast pushed out, that cement, whatever this cement is, the calcium salts, hydroxyapatite, it's going to harden, right? All cement hardens. So it hardens. So now this osteoblast is trapped by the matrix that it produced. And the osteoblast is not called an osteoblast anymore. It now becomes an osteocyte, right? And it's trapped. And the space that this is trapped in, the hollowed out cavity that it is now in, is called a lacunae. All right, those are some terms that we're going to hear. So you heard me talk about compact bone. I said we're going to focus on that. And there's also spongy bone. So right here, this is the full bone. It looks like the femur. Maybe this is the head of the femur. Now, this part here, this entire part, and this entire part, which is here, all of this is compact bone. Okay, and what's in the middle, the hollowed out portion, that's called spongy bone. Spongy, look like a sponge. So when we look at the compact portion, it looks very compact. And it's made up of these things called osteons. Osteons, to me, it looks like if you cut down a tree and you look at the rings of a tree, that's an osteon. So here's an osteon, here's an osteon, here's an osteon. This is an osteon pulled out a little bit so we can see the different layers to it. Okay. The layers, these rings, are referred to as concentric lamellae. They're called lamellae or concentric lamellae. Those are the rings. So each of these, or this is a concentric lamellae, this is a concentric lamellae, and this is a concentric lamellae. And you can see that right in the center of that, we have blood vessels. We have arteries, veins, and nerves. We have arteries, veins, and nerves. they go through what's called a central canal. That's right in the center, right? If we cut this, right, this is what we're looking at here. That is a central canal or a haversian canal, same thing. Here's another one, right? Because we've cut this, all they did is they kind of cut this in half right here, and they cut another one in half. So we could see the artery, vein, and nerves. That's why if you break a bone, it's painful. You got nerves in there, and bones can bleed. When you break a bone, you damage blood vessels, and you can get a pooling of blood in there called a hematoma. Hematoma, hema is blood. Toma sounds like tumor, a tumor of blood, a pooling of blood in there. Okay, so each of these are called a lamellae. It's just because it's going around is called concentric lamellae. The outer part of bone is called a periosteum. So tendons attached to the periosteum, ligaments attached to the periosteum. The inner part of bone is called an endosteum. Endosteum is the inner part of bone. Okay. So when we look at a model of bone, right here in the center, the arteries, veins, and nerves, that's in the central canal or the haversian canal. One of these things is really called an osteon, right? So we're looking at a bone osteon. This is an osteocyte. What was an osteocyte? An osteocyte was really an osteoblast at first, and it made matrix. It made calcium salts. It made this matrix, and then it hardened, and the cement hardened, and the osteoblast got trapped in its lacuna, and now it's not called an osteoblast, it's called an osteocyte. Okay, so this is an osteocyte, this is an osteocyte. The cavity alone, this is a lacuna. These are hollow. These are lacuna. Those are the cavities that the osteocyte sits in. Now, these jellyfish extensions, these finger-like extensions, they make little canals, and they're called canaliculi. Canaliculi. Those are the extensions. And they allow these cells to communicate with one another about what's going on with the bone density. They communicate. Okay? These are the rings. These are concentric lamellae. Right? That's one, that's one, that's one. So when we look at what Connect has asked before, again, you could say, I don't know what cell this is. Let's kind of look at, well, cut down a tree, you can see all these different rings going around, but this whole thing, this whole entire structure is blue. Well, that's an osteon. The whole thing is an osteon. When we look at just these hollowed out cavities, those are the lacunae. What's in the lacunae? Remember, an osteoblast makes the matrix, it makes that calcium, it pushes it out, and then when it calcifies, the osteoblast becomes an osteocyte. And the osteocyte sits in those. Okay, good place to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about muscle.